Hey everyone, welcome to today's webcast, Getting the Most from Microsoft Teams PSTN Functionality. I'm your host, Microsoft MVP, Nick Cavalancia. We've got a great panel of experts today to try to cover this topic to help you have a better understanding of what you should be doing and where you should go with your use of Teams and its voice calling functionality. Just to kind of go through our panel today and welcome each one of them. First up, we have Evan Zaleschuk. You can see here he's a cloud solution architect with Microsoft. Evan, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Always a pleasure. We've done a couple of these with Evan before. Always good to have you. We also have Michael Burrell. You can see he's Unified Communications Director with Orange Business Services. Michael, thanks for joining us as well.
Yes, thank you. Good day, everyone.
And last but certainly not least, Rob Doucette. Rob and I have done a bunch of these together. He's VP of Product Management at Martello. Rob, always good to see your face.
Likewise. Thanks, Nick.
Yeah, very good. So before we get into our agenda, we're going to stay here on this slide for a moment and just kind of cover a couple of housekeeping items briefly. Today's session is, of course, being recorded, and you will get a email in a couple of days with a link to the recording should you have to duck out early or you'd like to share it with a colleague, that sort of thing as well. Also, we do have Q&A time at the very end of today's webcast. So I have the Q&A box up here in front of me, so feel free to put questions in there. If something is really contextually appropriate, I may actually even insert it into the conversation that we're having today, just because sometimes you ask a question that's really poignant. It'd be good for us to talk about it then, rather than waiting to the end when everyone's sort of forgotten what were we talking about earlier. One of those deals. So if you have some questions, comments, whatever, stick those in the Q&A box. We'd love to have you participate as well. Let's look at our agenda really quickly here. It's pretty simple here. We're going to talk about really what Teams call functionality options are there for you, which one's going to be right for you. We want to kind of dive into that a bit. Want to talk about where in the end-to-end sort of perspective, meaning all the way from the user on that side to calling over there, maybe it's the SIP trunk or it's an SBC or whatever it is on that end, where in that end-to-end view can service delivery fail, and talk about why and where it's most likely, those sort of things. And then talk about how to use end-to-end monitoring as a way to ensure service delivery by being able to view the entirety of that process and know, hopefully proactively, at worst reactively, but hopefully proactively, where problems may be beginning to show up and try to remediate those issues before they become kind of large. Now, before we get started, we're going to stay on this slide here. I'm going to put a poll up for all of you in the audience here. There's quite a few of you here, and I want you just to go ahead and interact with the screen. And you'll see here as I launch this poll, the question here is, what Teams calling options do you currently have? And you see the options there. Again, just go ahead and interact with the screen. Call planning, direct routing, operator connect, and maybe a mix. And Michael, maybe if I can sort of choose you of our panel here, based on what you've seen in the industry when you're working with customers, what are you expecting to see here as the main option? There's only can choose one. So what do you think you're going to see mostly here?
Yeah, I would think if these are enterprise customers, Nick, that you're going to see direct routing will be number one, and then probably followed by operator connect.
Okay, Evan, same question. I mean, you're seeing and talking to customers all the time as well. Do you have a different opinion? Do you think it'd be something similar?
No, you know what, I agree with Michael. It really depends on the customer requirements. Operator Connect is still relatively new, so a lot of people are very interested in it. And we'll talk a little bit more about the differences, of course, between Operator Connect, direct routing, and calling plans in a coming slide.
Very good. It looks like about 2/3 of you have voted, which is really good. I appreciate that, Rob. So I'm going to stall one more second here. Any difference in opinion from your perspective, talking to customers?
No, it's pretty consistent. We get a lot of direct routing customers, a lot of interest in Operator Connect as that's becoming more popular, but I expect it will be lower on the list. And still a lot of mix out there too. I think we see a lot of global enterprises where they're using a mix of these options depending on what's available in their country.
Wonderful. That's odd. Oh, I just saw that it went from 64% voted to 63%. I'm like, you can't take a vote back. I realized somebody joined, and I'm like, okay, that makes more sense. Let's go ahead and close the poll and share the results out. And it looks like all of you guys are correct. Spot on. About almost half of you in the audience using direct routing, some of you using Operator Connect, a third of you using a mix of options, and 19% of you are using calling plans. So I'm going to go ahead and hide those results here. Put the deck back up here. And our first topic we're going to talk about here is just the idea of deciphering Teams call functionality. and looking at what the options are. And to do this, we've asked Evan to join us from Microsoft and to kind of cover the options that are available for Microsoft. And then I've got a couple of questions maybe we'll jump into as a group here. So Evan, I'm going to hand the floor to you.
Sure, thanks. So you'll notice on the slide it says 3 options, but I actually listed 4. The reason I said there's only 3 because there's only 3 currently in market, but we've got something new and exciting coming very soon that I'll talk about. Direct routing. Direct routing, as we saw from the poll, a lot of people are using direct routing. And by the way, Nick, I wanted to say thank you for including a combination of these services, because that's a kind of a large misunderstanding. A lot of customers and even some of my colleagues misunderstand that you have to choose one, but you can choose 2, 3, and soon 4 options to be able to have voice capabilities in Microsoft Teams. Direct routing, as the slide talks about, we can do a lot of things with direct routing. It's very flexible. It's a little bit more complicated to deploy, maybe complicated to support. That's why some organizations will choose calling plans. But the calling plans from Microsoft, it's not available everywhere. It's not available in every country. And we know that a lot of customers have contracts with their operators. They are happy with their operators, which is why direct routing is a great option for them as well. But calling plans is relatively simple to deploy, manage, and maintain because you're only using a single interface. Whereas direct routing, you need a little bit more skills in being able to deploy and support. And when it comes to resolving the problem, you have to look at more screens or more applications. Of course, you can go with a company like Orange, an operator like Orange that has managed services around direct routing, so to remove some of that complexity from you as a customer. Then Operator Connect. Operator Connect came out where we're combining, in my opinion, the simplicity of calling plans with some of the flexibility of direct routing. But I will say that even though Operator Connect is rooted in direct routing, it's just the operator takes care of that piece. We don't have feature parity at this time. There are differences between what you could do with direct routing and Operator Connect. But Operator Connect can be customized depending on your operator because there is some differentiation in the marketplace. Now, the 4th option is Operator Connect Mobile, which is coming to market very soon. What Operator Connect Mobile allows you to do is use your mobile device and that number on your mobile device as your Microsoft Teams number. So the scenario really becomes when someone makes a phone call to you, Teams on your phone rings and all your desktop clients ring. But you're going to say, but we can do that today. The difference is that we now incorporate into your native dialing app, whether it's iOS or Android. So you're going to start to have capabilities like answering a call on your native app, escalating it to a Teams call so that you could easily conference in more people, share screens, share content, manipulate content together. So we're quite excited about that being a 4th option for a lot of customers. And again, we'll be able to combine all 4 of these, or 3 of these, or 2 of these, or 1 of these into a customer based on their requirements.
It's interesting. One of the audience members, Brian, mentioned saying their reviewing options didn't have an option for that, as well as Van had mentioned they don't have anything set up yet. So there's still some people that are really sort of considering this. So it's good that you're covering these. And I think I know the answer to this question, Evan, but I'm going to ask it anyways because we had kind of a unanimous response both from the audience and from the 3 of you when we did the poll. But is there a Teams calling option where Microsoft's seeing the greatest adoption currently?
You know, from a greatest adoption, if we look at this point in time, we're seeing a lot of interest in Operator Connect. But again, it depends on the market segment, the company themselves, and as Michael referred to, a lot of enterprises need additional flexibility, so they're going to direct routing where they can implement other capabilities, whether it's things like overhead paging, or they need to integrate into a contact center, or they need to do other complex things. Microsoft is working on bringing that feature parity to Operator Connect, but it's not quite there yet. So really, it's important to make sure that you understand all the options, engage a consultant if necessary to help you choose which option is best for you as an organization, or which options are best for your different parts of your organization. But I still think direct routing, as we saw from the poll, is probably deployed more than anything else. Because, as I mentioned, calling plans isn't available everywhere, but direct routing is. As long as you have an operator in your country or your region, direct routing is an option.
Yeah,
Good.
so
Michael, you
Aaron,
want to add something?
sure, yeah. Why don't we go to the next slide, Nick? But
Before we do that, let's put a poll up. I just want to see where people are in their implementation before we compare the two, if that's okay. And I just want to put this up again. You guys can interact with the screen. And the idea here is just we're trying to better understand. This kind of goes back to even Brian was saying, what if we're reviewing? Gotcha, Brian. We already had this other question teed up. So the idea here is, where are you at? Is it already in use? Are you in planning phases? You're projecting to actually have something up in 6 or 12 months from now, or you have no plans whatsoever? And Michael, maybe I could just again start with you. Where are you thinking customers are today, based on when you're interacting with them and where they're thinking in terms of, I have something I need to maybe augment, or I'm planning in the future, or I'm not even sure yet. Where are they at? What do you think is going to be the top answer?
well, we saw, thanks to COVID-19, oddly enough, the rapid adoption of Microsoft Teams as a collaboration client. And so as Evan could tell you, they went from 19 million daily active users in December of 2019 to now, 270 million monthly active users. And so then subsequently, we saw a wave of take up on using Teams for meetings. And then the third wave has really been calling. So we have seen quite a number of customers, start with POCs or pilots and then move into deployment. So I suspect that we're going to see a number that are already in use, maybe even 40%, and then quite a number in the planning phase. Once we see the poll results.
Let's take a look at those real quick. I'm going to close out the poll. Looks like, again, about 2/3 of you voted. I really appreciate that. That's very kind of you. That's a fairly high number here. You can see it sort of aligns with what you're talking about, Michael. 53% already have something in use. 15% of you have no plans. You're not even sure yet. And then some of you are somewhere. There's another, what is that? 31% or so are somewhere in the, we're getting it done. We're either planning it or we're projected to be done in a certain period of time. So, Michael, I actually want to stick with you if I can. And I'm wondering, just sort of from the partner perspective, what should be the determining factor or factors that our audience should be considering when they're thinking about Operator Connect versus direct routing?
Sure. So if we'll go to the next slide, we've got a comparison chart for you that I think will be helpful. So as Evan had said earlier, right, it all comes down to actually a site-by-site decision and what your requirements are. So if it's a real simple site, then you can go Operator Connect, and the convenience of that is, we as an operator will either port your numbers or we'll generate a new number range, push that right to the Teams admin center, and then you go in and you can assign those numbers to end users and so on. So very simple, but if you have some complexity at that site, or you're doing business in India and China, then you're going to need to consider another option like direct routing, which we offer as a service, right? So we take the complexity away from you, and we plug in a SIP trunk and so on. But you can see going down the list on the left-hand side of your screen, if you run into analog, and I'm always surprised with large enterprises what you're going to uncover. Nick or Evan already mentioned overhead paging. They use analog to open a door, to do alerting, and then the classic is fax, right? We try and move what we can to the cloud, but you're going to uncover things as you go through this deployment. Sometimes customers can't, get rid of a PBX for one reason or another, a legacy one, and they do need to interoperate with it. That would drive you into the direct routing column. Now, the next three, it's all the same, right? I mean, you can get, support SIP phones, native phones, emergency calling, as well as attendant consoles. There's a subtle difference with recording. On the left-hand side, you would need to use and set your compliance policy within Teams Admin Center. The right-hand side, you could use something like AudioCode SmartTap to do the recording on a call-by-call basis, right, without necessarily changing your compliance policy. And then Contact Center, right-hand side, is where either Genesys or NICE and Contact are using their ACD capabilities to route those calls, hand it off to direct routing, which then completes the call to the agent on Teams, versus the extend model of plugging it in. And the only other thing there's two other things I'll mention. One is, quality of service. Now, the quality of service is really good as long as you're using local internet breakout at your site, right? I mean, you don't, and we can talk about this a little bit later on, but you don't want to hub your internet, or sometimes we've seen problems when customers have used like Zscaler or things like that. But direct routing is really important if you're in a country where you want to keep the local calls local, right? So then you want to use local media bypass, and that would be available with direct routing. Or another scenario is, as you can see down at the bottom, so Microsoft has 33 partners today for Operator Connect, and they're covering about 60 countries. Whereas in the direct routing side, we can deploy the service almost anywhere in the world as long as the country is not embargoed. So for example, Orange today, we've already deployed direct routing for customers in 133 countries. And then, as Evan had said earlier, right, it's not a binary decision. It's one where you can do a mix and match based on your requirements per site.
Evan, anything to add? You and I were talking a little bit before, and you had some strong feelings on one or the other.
Yeah, you know what? No, Michael made a lot of really good points, and there's a couple that I just want to expand on a bit. And we talked about direct routing and Operator Connect aren't exactly the same, and so you'll probably see that the site resiliency comment about Operator Connect doesn't support survivable branch appliances for site resiliency today. So some organizations need that, so that defers them to direct routing. In saying that, though, it is something that Microsoft is well aware of. We've gotten a lot of feedback on that. So it is something that we're looking at adding. And today, it's really people like Michael and Orange, it can offer some type of resiliency into those sites, but not using a survivable branch appliance. The other one that we get a conversation going about a lot is the quality of service. And not getting too technical, but one of the requirements for Operator Connect is that the operator and Microsoft connect our networks together. We use something called Microsoft Azure Peering Service. It's geo-redundant, it's resilient, and what it means is that there is quality of service between the operator and Microsoft when it comes to all the media workloads. Now, if you wanted to extend that quality of service down to your site, it's possible, but you can't use internet-based connectivity because the internet doesn't honor quality of service. So again, it's really important to work with someone like Michael and Orange to understand the differences between all these services, and then even within each service, what can Orange do to meet your business requirements? So we understand there are differences. You need to understand those differences as well, and that's where people like Michael and Orange really shine.
Wonderful. Let's move on and talk about our next topic, which is thinking about where in the process the service delivery can fail. It's one thing just to simply say, Teams is down, it's Microsoft's fault. Maybe not. I mean, and probably not. There's a lot of other things that can go wrong. This is like saying, if you have a car and you go, it's always the tire. Not necessarily. There's a lot of other moving parts. So let's take a look at the next slide. And you'll see here just sort of a mock-up. It's actually an oversimplified mock-up of what an environment might look like, because we're trying to simply point out things like at the top, you see it at 12 o'clock as a clock would be, you see the Teams cloud, the Microsoft cloud there with Teams running in it. You see you have session border controllers, you have SIP trunks, you have Operator Connect at the bottom. Over on the right-hand side, you actually have people that are trying to connect with on the right-hand side, and on the left is the actual user that's trying to connect. And what's even missing from this graphic, which would make it even more complex, is, and Evan, you kind of touched on this just when you talked about things like quality of service, whether you're going across the internet or you're internal in a network. It depends on all that connectivity. So as a matter of fact, one of our audience members, Colin, had mentioned one of his issues was an issue about the handsets that his organization is using. And so now we're thinking about, well, that end user over there down at this part, I'm putting it there on the left, they have a handset or a headset. That could be part of the problem. It could be their laptop, could be their software, could be their connection to the internet, their Wi-Fi at home, how they connect to the office if it's a VPN, how they route within the organization. If the organization's routing goes against Microsoft recommendations and has hairpin turns or anything that does network scanning, I mean, all this stuff gets mixed into this idea of trying to get that user on the left to make a phone call to the person over there on the right of the slide. And it's just not as simple as saying, you know, oh, it's Teams or it's Microsoft, because a lot of things can go wrong. And so I've got questions for all three of you, Rob, Evan, and Michael, but I'm gonna start with you, Evan. And that's sort of, what are some of the ways that Microsoft is ensuring Teams call service availability? Let's start there and kind of eliminate at least the portion of the calls where Microsoft's not the issue. So how are they trying to ensure service call availability?
Well, I think it really goes back, and Nick, you touched on it. Oftentimes it has something to do with network connectivity, whether it's within your site or whether it's someone using Wi-Fi in their home and their wife and all their kids or their husband are all streaming and chewing up a bunch of the bandwidth. So really there's a lot of components to that. How do you have visibility into all that? That's a good question, and that's where Martello comes into play. But from a Microsoft perspective, Microsoft is continually invested in their Microsoft network. It's the second largest network in the world, tremendous bandwidth, round trip times are very fast. So that's a piece that Microsoft's been doing to help address network connectivity, but not down to the site. Then, and of course, I mentioned how Microsoft is connected with, in this case, Orange, using Microsoft Azure peering service. We can do quality of service over that. So we've been doing a lot of things to improve that quality, but also geo-resiliency in the architecture behind Teams. And there's things called transport relays, media processors that are scattered all over the world, so we can reduce the amount of time it takes for your packets to get to Microsoft, and being able to communicate with each other in meetings and chats and one-on-one audio and video. So there's a lot of things that have been added. Now, there's also, and I go through this all the time, there are perceived issues, quality issues, and then there's real technical issues. How do you tell the difference? So for example, a perceived quality issue, we might all be on a meeting together and everybody sounds great except for me. And why doesn't Evan sound great? So someone complains, and it's because Evan's yelling at his laptop. He's not using a headset, he's not using a handset, he's not using a microphone and speaker. Maybe he's using an older laptop. Just microphone and speaker are too close together. So everybody says Evan's quality was terrible. But how do you know? When you go into the Teams Admin Center and some of the first party tools that we have, you can see that. But what if it's a technical issue? What if it's a network issue? What if it's Evan's Wi-Fi in his home that's really the problem? Microsoft doesn't give you a lot of visibility into that. And what's even more important, what we're seeing a lot now is, well, are we talking about being reactive to a problem, or can we be proactive to solve problems before they affect your user environment? And again, that's what Martello does. And Rob's going to get into that in more detail, but how about if we prevent problems from occurring before they impact your end users? That is really powerful.
Rob, let me actually bring the conversation over to you for a moment. So from your interactions with customers, what aspects of all the stuff that makes up a Teams call, both the stuff we can see on the screen, the stuff that I've sort of implied, that Evan's implied, where are you seeing the call break down and being the root source of that problem? Where in this entire sort of architecture are you seeing most of the issues to blame?
Yeah, Evan touched on many of them, and what's interesting is with many of our interactions with customers, and Evan and I have discussed this at length, the natural reaction is people think it's Microsoft, right? We sort of refer to this as this logo blame game, right? This Teams thing didn't work, they blame Microsoft. But to Evan's point, there's so many things along that chain that can go wrong, and especially in the last couple of years, right? We fast forward to sort of pre-pandemic times. IT mostly had a small number of offices with a large number of people, well-tuned networks, pretty good visibility across the network. And then that all flipped upside down, where essentially IT was managing a unique office for every employee that they had because everybody was at home. And you had other people in that home, and it wasn't a well-designed Wi-Fi network perhaps, so they weren't using headsets, all those kinds of things. And now IT didn't have any visibility into what was going on. So new tools were needed to sort of bring that visibility back to IT so they could understand. Fundamentally, I think most of the issues that we see in that home environment were issues with home Wi-Fi, right? People were not running in well-tuned networks, or they were sharing their home with children that were doing virtual school, or other, people in the office that were also, or in the home rather, that were also, working from that home office and consuming the bandwidth. So that was a big chunk of problems earlier on. What we're seeing now, though, is, as Michael described earlier, Teams has exploded through the pandemic while most of us were working from home. And now everybody's going back to the office with those behaviors of using Teams. And it's not an audio experience anymore. It's a very rich audio, video, screen sharing experience that is certainly an improvement in collaboration, but it has extra demand on the network. And now what we're seeing is, everyone's come back to the office and IT's finding out, oh, you know what, the office isn't really well suited for everyone to come back to the office and be having these interactive video calls. So we're seeing different challenges now in that sort of second phase, if you will, the whole return to work. And now people are, redesigning the network, identifying the path to Microsoft, right? I'll show an example later where, a lot of offices were still using VPNs and tunneling traffic back to a head office, and that is a horrible design for Teams, right? You're going to have a bad experience. So those kinds of things are what we're seeing. I'll touch a bit more about that when I jump into the demo a bit later.
Good answer, Rob. I appreciate that. Michael, I want to kind of get a little bit of a partner perspective and sort of build on something that Rob said about the blame game. So I'm wondering, one, where are customers having issues, and sort of a part two is, are they playing that blame game and, let's say, blaming you as the partner when it's really something within their own environment?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I appreciate both Evan and Rob's perspective. Sometimes we get into this. Now, often it does come back to, network design, and you definitely don't want to get into a blame game scenario where, who is responsible. You want to, and that's the advantage of the Martello tool. It actually allows you to isolate and pinpoint what's causing the problem. But a lot of times what we see is, we go through extensive planning with the customer, and then we go through deployment of the site, and we get the customer actually do an acceptance test plan with us and then sign off. And then, things are really good, right? Because we've thoroughly tested the service for that group of users at the site. We've done hypercare to resolve any issues that pop up. And so often what we see after it's been in a run phase is somebody will go back and they'll change a configuration of something, of a firewall. Or another thing that we see is, the customers may not be keeping up with endpoint firmware upgrades. Like as an example, in April, audio codes on their native Teams phones was upgrading from Android 7 to 9, right? And you needed to do that in sequence on the Teams Admin Center side, and then on the actual endpoint side. And if you didn't, you missed that window in May, right, then you may be a version 2 behind. You'd have to do a manual update, but that could cause a problem down the road as that endpoint gets out of sync with the latest version. So it's more, it's more in the run phase when you see some kind of change introduced in the network, or it could be an ISP change as well, or degradation of their specific leg in the calling journey.
Michael, I just wanted to touch on something you said, because I think it's great. The endpoint firmware. You wouldn't believe how many times I've been asked, "Hey, I'm having a problem with Microsoft Teams," and they described the problem, and I'd say, "Well, have you updated the firmware on that device?" And people just look at me stunned. And they don't realize that this piece of hardware actually has to be updated the same way your PCs have to be updated, the same way your mobile phones need to be updated. So it's a really good point that keeping current. And also, as Microsoft adds more features to Teams, firmware updates might be required to take advantage of those features, whether it's things like the Open Office program, so that your microphone almost creates an acoustic fence, so that when you're talking and your dog's barking its head off, which happens to me all the time, people on the other end of the call can't hear it. If you didn't update the firmware, they'd be hearing my dog bark.
Yeah, and that's the advantage of the cloud, is you're introducing a slew of new features, right, which is great, but you have to stay current. And one of the things we do offer to customers is phone management, where we do those firmware upgrades. Or same thing with the Microsoft Teams rooms, right? You got to stay current there too, especially with all of the innovations coming out.
So let's move on to our last topic, which is the idea of leveraging end-to-end monitoring to ensure the service delivery. Now, I'm going to put up another slide here and just talk about why you need to have end-to-end service visibility. And you can go and put that up for me, Rob, if you would. There's two parts to this. There's sort of goals and methods. And I want to cover the goals with you briefly and then talk about methods from a high level but technical discussion about the different kinds of monitoring that's possible. In trying to figure out where an issue is within a Teams call, again, I laid out a whole bunch of aspects that could go wrong. So did Evan, so did Michael, Rob did as well. Ultimately, if you look at the first goal being a quality user experience, if the user's having a quality user experience, it means everything's working. And it also means if something's not working, they at least have a good enough experience where, for example, if you could somehow proactively know there was an issue that was going to happen, you could send somebody an email before they made a call that there was some problem with the Teams or with voice calling or something internal that's causing the ramification to be Teams is having an issue with voice calling, that still provides some kind of quality user experience where they're not just calling the help desk all the time saying, I'm having an issue. The other goal here is to have that visibility itself, to understand where in that process, literally for Rob, what is Rob using? What handset does he have? What system is he running on? What kind of connectivity does he have? Are those things functioning? Is he connecting to the network via VPN? And following the path all the way of every single, let's say, service, network device, anything else that might be in the way between Rob and Teams and ultimately out to any PSTN hardware and that sort of thing, having visibility into all of that so there's this insight. You know, the having the visibility is just information, but the insight is now understanding how is that impacting Rob? Is that something that's going to cause him and or a whole bunch of other people in his same office and they're all going to have issues or not? Those kinds of things are what you want to have visibility into so you can make those informative responses to take care of issues proactively as best as possible. It's also because there's so many facets. The third one there, understanding what the root cause is. And then, like I mentioned earlier, trying to remediate the issue as quickly as you can. In some cases you can't, especially let's just say it's Teams itself. It does happen every once in a while. The Teams service or one of the underlying services, whether it's SharePoint or Exchange or OneDrive or whatnot, goes down. If you could either remediate it, which you can't in the case of Microsoft, because obviously you can't fix it, but if you could at least notify people, that's as close to remediation as you can get. But if it actually ends up being it's one of your routers or a firewall configuration or whatever the case is, obviously then you can remediate yourself because you can see everyone who's not using that firewall has no problem getting to Teams, but everyone that is using that firewall is having a problem with Teams. It helps you figure out the root cause. And there's a couple methods over on the right hand side of the slide here. Kind of a 50,000 foot view. Synthetic transactions are a monitoring methodology where an agent, a bot, depending on what you want to call it. I think in Martello they even call it a robot. It's put at a location to represent anyone that is connecting the same way at that location. So for example, if I have a location that might have, let's say, wired users that connect through a cable to the corporate network, and then some wireless users, I'd probably have to have two bots at that location, so I can get an understanding of how are the people that connect via wire and how the people that are connecting via Wi-Fi are interacting with, in this case, Teams. Now, the thing that synthetic transactions does is it actually simulates the user itself. It interacts with Teams, it schedules calls, it has calls. It might even do all the other things you do in Office 365 as well, or Microsoft 365, excuse me, where you're sending emails or you're trying to, anything you're trying to upload, download files, anything that you might do inside of Teams, you're doing that, but it's also simulating those types of actions. So that's one way of understanding, are things working or not? Often in some cases proactively, because you can do it 24 hours a day before users actually get to work. You know there's a problem before they get there. Then I have real user monitoring. This is more watching an individual user and then how they're interacting with Teams. And you can get a lot of that data from the call quality dashboard and the data behind it and that sort of thing as well, of doing some monitoring of the user themselves. And the network path visualization is, I kind of call it traceroute on steroids. If you think about traceroute checking to get from step to step, hop to hop within your network, if you could visualize that instead of just having the data and actually see where each user's having issues or not having issues, if things are getting a reasonable speed in terms of the lack of latency, that sort of thing, that's what network path visualization does. Now, if you put all that together, you end up having a lot more visibility than just having any one of those technologies. Now, Rob, I know that I've not done it in complete justice because you're far more the expert than I am, although I've interacted with these quite a bit over the years here. So I'm wondering if you would show the audience maybe a little bit of the visibility that Vantage DX provides around team call functionality, that sort of thing, and just kind of so the audience gets an idea of what's possible today.
Absolutely. And before I just jump in, I just want to sort of tie in these technologies to what Evan described of moving from reactive to proactive, because that's really what we're after here, right? And we at Martello, when we talk to a lot of these customers and prospects, and they're trying to get their arms around their team's usage and experience, we walk them through this narrative that we call the pro story, prioritize, resolve, optimize. And the end goal, of course, is to be proactive. Where we start with prioritize, we can help you understand what's happening now. Where should you prioritize and spend your time based on current problems and issues? And then we move into resolving, right? We want to now take action against those problems, whether identify VPNs and poor performing offices, that type of thing. That's going to be really rooted with the network path visualization that you just mentioned, Nick. Heavy dose of steroids, I guess. And then last but not least, we leave you with the optimized piece where you refer to those robots, and those robots give you that proactive view of they're constantly using all the aspects of Teams as well as the rest of the Microsoft 365 suite. So things like Exchange workflow or mail flows and things like that. The robot is testing all that kind of stuff 24/7 so that the next set of problems an organization discovers is discovered by the robot and not the user. You get a chance to fix that before anybody even notices that there was a problem. So with that said, let me jump into the demo.
And Rob, while you're doing that, I just wanted to mention to the audience, pay attention to two things as Rob goes through this demo. I used to be a partner before I joined Microsoft. I was a partner for almost 25 years. So for me, working with customers, time to resolution, how long does it take us to resolve an issue when it does occur? So if we have to be reactive, how long does that take? And the other thing to take for the technical people on the call, think of what level of skill set will be required to troubleshoot those issues. And when you look at this, I feel that, well, a level 1 support person can kind of become like a level 2. Level 2 can be kind of become level 3, but I'm really leaving that to the audience for them to see and understand and make that determination themselves.
Thanks, Evan. Great points. So I'm pretty excited. I'm actually showing some things that aren't fully released yet. So we're days away, and this will all be available for our customers and people who want to check out a demo of this live. It's probably something new even to Michael and Evan here. So we're pretty excited about these new capabilities where we're now surfacing this in more visual ways to surface these insights really quickly. So the dashboard I'm looking at here is our Teams overview dashboard. And it's giving me a complete top level view of what's happening in my organization with Teams, the types of calls that are happening. I see the volume of calls and how the quality may be impacted as the volume is increasing, a very common UC thing to look at, is my quality degrading as the volume increases. I can get a global view of the activity around the world. By default, we're highlighting the failed and poor interactions that your organization is experiencing, but you can also include good if you want to sort of get a usage or activity view across the world as well. And then we automatically summarize here, again, back to that prioritize comment, which locations and which users today are having the most problems? Where should I spend my time today? And then at the bottom here, we have a summary of the meetings that are failing. And where this is interesting, we talked a bit about meeting room, Teams meeting rooms, and that's really growing quickly. We're getting a ton of activity around meeting rooms and being able to understand, is the source of my poor experiences related to something with that meeting room? One of the devices, Evan and Michael both talked about how important the firmware updates are. And some of these devices may not be performing well in a critical meeting room in one of your offices because you haven't updated that device. So being able to identify here, I don't have a meeting room to identify, but here I can see, I can group by, sort, and take a look at maybe all the problems are actually coming from experiences that are happening from a particular meeting room. One other thing we can do from here, so I'm gonna go up to this geographical view, and this is interactive. I can drill in here, and I'm gonna drill into the Ottawa location. And what this is gonna give me is now a specific dashboard, our location dashboard, and I've drilled into Ottawa. So I'm specifically looking at what do we know about what's going on in Ottawa, the calls that are happening, the types of calls, the ratio of good to failed and poor calls, what ISPs are using. Is there a pattern of failed calls across one particular ISP? And then again, a summary of the recent failed calls in that office. What's pretty cool for those of you who may have seen demos in the past, we're now surfacing our diagnostics tests, and I'll go into a visual example of this in a second, but this is where we have a probe deployed into the office, measuring the route to the Teams data center and looking for, which hop along that path is causing, round trip time, a jitter, or packet loss. And then last but not least in this view is we also have that we talked about, that robot and that proactive view. So these charts are giving us a view of what is the robot seeing from the Ottawa location. So we're getting a 5-minute interval sort of view here of all the actions that a user might be doing with Teams, not just holding an audio and video call, which is critical, of course, but things like uploading content, downloading content, checking presence time, all the types of things that a user might do are all summarized here, and I get a pretty good snapshot of the activity or the health of the Ottawa office from the perspective of that robot. So again, it goes back to, all the things that might be going on, the network piece, the user activity, the network performance, that end-to-end view. So we can give you that clear view so you can understand, where should I spend my time and where is that problem, from a resolution perspective, how am I going to tackle that?
Rob, can you show a little bit on the telephony side of this conversation? We had that architecture slide, and we're showing all the other aspects that are really outside the control necessarily of the organization, might even be something that Michael's organization might manage, that kind of thing. So can you show maybe some monitoring of the telephony side of this?
Absolutely. So let me jump over to, so we have a new calls dashboard, and here I'm summarizing for a short window all the calls that are happening. I can drill into a particular call as well, but I'll show a summary here of some calls that have happened over a particular time period. And this includes all call types. So whether it was a calling plan, direct routing, operator connect, everything is summarized in this view. And if I go down here, I can get into the details of the audio streams, the video streams, the screen sharing streams. We're bubbling up the most problematic streams based on the thresholds that Microsoft publishes in terms of best practices. And then what's really cool, new capability that we're launching is visibility into the telephony side. Here's, I've got an audio code session border controller, and I can see what does the mean opinion score look like on all aspects. So there's 4, we could spend a lot of time talking about this, but there's sort of bidirectional inbound and outbound activity into a session border controller on both sides of the telephony and the IP side. And here we're identifying for the PSTN side, the session border controller side, and the team side, what are those calculated mean opinion scores? So we can identify if there is a problem with the telephony experience, what side of the network is this on? Because we talked on that simplified diagram a few slides ago, how complicated this can get. And how many things are in play, and you need to have that full visibility. So we're bubbling up all this information now so we can understand for a particular call, identify the session border controller that was used, and look at the performance and health of that session border controller for the time that call happened. And it's going to really help me identify if the session border controller was the problem, or even more specifically, was one network segment going in or out of the session border controller really the root cause here. And I'm just going to jump into one more thing. I know I mentioned I was going to talk a bit about the visual view of our network diagnostics here, back to that whole, identifying where the problem actually is. We do have this hop-by-hop analysis. This is that Ottawa view I showed a minute ago into the Teams data center. And in this case, I do have some packet loss and round trip time being introduced across my ISP here in Canada. So it's a very easy visual way for us to identify, is there something in the local network, something across the ISP, or is there something happening on the Microsoft segment? And one very last thing I'll mention here is we have this visual geographical view up in the top here. And for this case, we see our Ottawa users are thankfully entering the US East data center, kind of what you would expect. We talked a little bit about network design and use of VPNs really sort of being a challenge for some organizations. I'm just going to use this example here. We'll add in my Bangalore site here. You can see this, poor person probably trying to have some good Teams experiences from Bangalore, and we see they're actually being brought to the US East data center, probably a VPN or DNS issue, but it's a very quick way to identify visually, that's what's going on. He should be going to a local data center, but they're not. So it's just another way to get a very quick view as to where should I spend my time to try and troubleshoot this issue effectively. Back to Evan's comment, these kinds of things can really, really drive down the MTTR time.
Rob, I got a couple of questions came in from the audience, and then Michael, I've got a question I did want to ask you as well afterwards. But Rob, Denender's asking, can this show all network devices that are in the call path, like switches, routers, and where the problem exists?
Yeah, so this, if I just jump back here, and I'll expand it if I'm looking at a simplified view based on grouping, but here we'll see every single device that the path has taken, and we've had customers identify network devices in their own private network that were introducing delay that they had no idea of, and they were actually challenging the results until they went, found the device, solved the problem, and realized, you know what, it was right. And we actually had an interesting little anecdote from Martello's side. We had an SD-WAN edge appliance in play at our Ottawa office here, and we used our own software because we had this 1 second kind of little delay in meetings. It was very difficult to try and troubleshoot. We used this tool. We identified that the SD-WAN appliance came up as a problem in the view here, which we questioned as well. We reconfigured the SD-WAN device, and the problem went away. And now that 1 second delay that we were getting in all our Teams experiences from our Ottawa office vanished. So yes, we can identify all the devices along that path.
And David's asking, does this hop-by-hop analysis require robots and probes installed?
So this would require a probe installed. So the example here I have in Ottawa, I have a probe running on a virtual machine here in the Ottawa office. It could also run on an endpoint. So if Evan at home were having some issues, we would deploy this. It's a lightweight Windows service on Evan's machine. It runs this data collection, sends it up to our analytics engine, which we can look at, solve the problem. And Evan doesn't need to keep that probe running all the time. It's really meant to be used in diagnostic situations. So we don't, it's not like we start step one with deploying this everywhere. Back to that comment about the prioritize, we identify which locations, which users really need some extra diagnostics, selectively deploy the probes into those environments, get the data we need to solve the problem, and then leave them with the robot so that we have that 24/7 proactive view to catch the next set of problems when they do occur.
Good stuff. There's a bunch more questions that have come in. We're still going to answer those, so keep typing those, everyone in the audience here. But I did want to get back to one last question, Michael, for you, which was, with all this visibility that Rob is showing, do you have an example maybe of a customer where having this level of visibility has helped you as a provider, help them identify problems, remediate them quickly, that sort of thing?
Sure, great question. And what we did is we took the Martello Vantage GX tool and we built a service around it called Employee Experience Management. And we worked with a customer, Mondelez. They're the 4th largest snacking company in the world. If you've ever enjoyed an Oreo cookie or Trident gum, that's coming from Mondelez, and they all have a wealth of other snacks that you could imagine. And so they have 80,000 employees around the world. And so what we did is we worked together with them in Martello, and then we created unique user groups. They wanted to be able to provide a higher level of service to 150 VIPs, so that was one group, then 450 critical users, and then we have the large population of regular users. But for those first two groups, you are using the tracking, the robot from the end users' endpoints, right, so that we could see any kind of issues they may be having, before they're potentially impacted. And then for the large population of 65,000, then we are using the service to be able to more rapidly repair the problem or isolate and then fix the problem, or proactively sending out the probes being able to, or robots being able to send those synthetic transactions So you're actually building a picture of what the usage looks like so that you can then, if a general problem emerges, solve it before it even affects the users and they start calling the help desk. And then the last thing we do is we also have provided a customer success manager that's using this tool as well to provide historical and data insights for the customer.
Great answer here. So, Rob, I know you've got a couple slides I think you wanted to cover, just a little bit about Martello. Why don't you go ahead and do that? We've got a bunch of questions that have come in. Keep typing those questions in, and we'll do some Q&A after you're done, Rob.
Great, thanks, Nick. Yeah, just quickly, I mean, we've been around for a while doing this in other areas, even before Teams took off. I mean, this was a pivot for us that you know has turned out to be quite a good pivot given the success of Teams the last couple of years. But we're rooted from a Mitel business back in the day, so we've been doing call quality analysis, voice quality for over a decade. Now applying that to the exciting world of Microsoft Teams. We're a gold partner, co-sell with Microsoft. We interact quite a bit with Evan and the rest of Microsoft to help provide this clarity and visibility to organizations around the world, and been recognized by analysts and our customers with pretty glowing reviews around the globe. And then just wanted to talk a bit about next steps here. So if anybody wanted to see a more in-depth view of what I showed today, I just sort of showed the tip of the iceberg, but there's all sorts of other things that we can show in terms of how we help an organization with Teams as well as the rest of the Microsoft 365 suite. So we'd be happy to tee up a demo. And as Michael mentioned, we have a go-to-market joint strategy with this employee experience management program. And so, there's also, depending on where you are in your planning, we'd love to tee off a proof of concept with Orange. So Michael, maybe you can describe a little bit about the proof of concept that we could kick off with Orange.
Sure, we'd be glad to set that up. We do a number of different things for customers. If you're at the planning stage, we'd be glad to set up a Operator Connect proof of concept. We can get that turned up very quickly. Also direct routing, we can provide that from, we've got SBCs in labs around the world, and so we could spin that up, and then we can layer in, also doing a test. Say you're in production. I know half of you are delivering a Microsoft Teams calling service today, right? We could come in together with you, sit down in a workshop, and then identify, there may be either mission critical sites or user groups that you want to identify, and then either we could test it out with regard to either trouble resolution and pinpointing where the problems are, or getting some feedback on a specific user group, and we'd be glad to do that with you.
So let's do some questions. We've got about 7 minutes left. Phil's asking, I noticed you listed survivable the branch appliances. I was too many acronyms, too many TLAs, 3-letter acronyms. I know you listed SBAs as a reason to use direct routing versus Operator Connect. Do you see many people using SBA? From our experience with SBA, it's so limited, it's almost not worth it without knowing the PSTN numbers, no directory, etc. If you do see them, what SBA vendor do you have success with monitoring or using to provide a good experience?
I could answer that, or I could take the first step, but yeah, we've deployed over 70 multinational corporations on Teams calling, and the only call that we've gotten for survivable branch appliance is from mining companies. We have 4 different mining companies. One is gold, the other is minerals, and so on and so forth, and they have mine sites where because of regulation and so on, the telephony service absolutely positively can't go down. But frankly, outside of that, we've not gotten, a request for SBA. Usually your internet connectivity is good enough, or you could do, dual ISPs if you needed to, right, and have diverse connectivity at the site level. But it's not really been something that we've seen a great demand for, so I wouldn't let that hold you back.
Rob, there's another question came in from David. He's asking, does the probe robot require a physical box installed? I think you mentioned lightweight VM or service on a machine.
Yeah, it essentially runs as a Windows service. So it can run on an endpoint, it can run in a container, it can run in a virtual machine. It's pretty flexible in terms of where it can go. But the typical model would be a virtual machine in, let's say, an office where you have the clusters of users, or directly on an endpoint where you want some additional information specifically about that user because you want to capture all the details right down to their device.
That's just Jerry's question, who was asking about a home user if you wanted to monitor one person. So that answers that. Michael's wondering, is this multi-tenant for MSPs?
It is, yeah. So we have a few MSPs now, and frankly, large organizations like, Michael was describing the Mondelez experience, right, where they've got VIP users, critical users, and then the large employee writ large, and they treat that very similar as well, where the data is kept separate. We can provide SLAs for each of those views as well. So yes, we can onboard that into a multi-tenant environment.
And then Denender's got a follow-up question. They had asked about when you were showing the network path visualization and showing which devices along the way might be to blame. And they're asking, does this also show what the issue is in that device? Like, is it a QoS marking issue or a bandwidth or a codec issue?
No, we don't. So the measurements that we can gather for each of those hops is a performance measurement of round trip time, jitter, and packet loss. And then from there might be some extra information that we need to decipher to get to the root cause. With that said, we also, there's so much I could show in the demo. We do have third-party integrations into network management systems. So think of the System Center, SolarWinds, PRTGs of the world. We pull all that data in as well and can correlate that into the experience. So, and often those tools do have that detail where I can say, here's the IP address of the network device that has the problem. Oh, and System Center is managing that device, and we have some alerts here about, insert your performance problem of, that you'd like to talk about, and then we can correlate that and say, okay, that's what we need to do to improve this experience.
Yeah, great answer. Let's see, a bunch more. So for you, Michael, Denender's asking who we need to reach out to for a POC on one of the Orange customers for a live demo. I think that's basically who do they need to reach out for a POC?
Yeah, you can just go to our website, www.orange.com, and you can contact one of our people. Yeah, I think there's some contact information that we'll provide in the slide as well, and we'd be glad to provide you with a demo.
Very good. Ed is asking, Rob, this is for you. Can the bot run on a Mac OS endpoint running Office 365 Teams app?
Good question. Right now, we are a Windows-only probe, but this is high on our list of something to solve so that we can bring in the MacBooks out there and Linux machines as well. So in that case, what we would typically recommend is that we put a probe or a robot as close to that user as possible. If they're working in a location like an office, we could put it in the office and get almost the same view. But otherwise, that's a roadmap item for us.
Very good. And Rob, I'll throw one more question at you. It looks like we have about a minute and a half left till the top of the hour. I'm not sure this is your sphere of influence, but you might know the answer. Tim is asking, is there a GSA schedule for the Vantage DX products?
Is there what? Sorry, I missed the...
a GSA schedule for government purchases.
Yes, so we do have a number of government clients already today. So depending on the certification levels and stuff that they would be looking at, we can have that conversation. But we've got large government customers in the US and Canada, Australia, the UK already today.
Excellent. So we've got about a minute left, so I'm going to go ahead and close things out. If you did put a question in that we didn't get a chance to answer today, someone from Martello will reach out to you directly and get your question answered. I also appreciate those of you that put some comments in about some stuff. That was actually really good. We like some of that coloring just to give us a sense of who our audience is and what's interesting to them and what's important to them. And also, of course, appreciate you guys all participating in the polls today. And Michael, Evan, and Rob, great conversation, good presentation, lots of really good detail. I even got a couple of sort of attaboys, if you will, from the audience here about the presentations. We provided, I think, some real good educational content today. So thank you all for participating today. Again, the audience, thanks for you all attending. This is going to go ahead and conclude today's webcast. Thanks a lot. We'll catch you on the next one.
Thank you all.